Nathan Carter had faced insurgents, seen the worst of war zones, and endured grueling military training. But none of that prepared him for the battle brewing in his own front yard. He had bought this house 2 years ago, a modest but well-kept property at the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was his sanctuary, his escape from the world, from the noise, from the chaos of deployment. Here, he could finally breathe. He spent his mornings sipping coffee on his porch, his evenings restoring his old truck in the driveway, and weekends catching up with his old military buddies who often stopped by. But apparently, all of this was unacceptable to one person, Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of the Homeowners Association. Nathan had never been one to pick fights. He believed in respect, in picking battles wisely, in standing down when necessary. But Karen? She made that impossible. It started small. A letter in his mailbox about his excessively large American flag, something he had proudly displayed since moving in. He ignored it. Then came another letter, claiming his front lawn was not in compliance with HOA standards. Strange, since his lawn was neatly trimmed, better kept than most of his neighbors. He let that slide too. But then, one crisp Saturday morning, as Nathan enjoyed a rare peaceful moment on his porch, Karen showed up in person. Clipboard in hand, short blonde bob styled in a way that screamed authority, and an expression that could curdle milk. "You're in violation, Mr. Carter," she announced, her voice carrying that familiar, grating tone of someone who had spent far too long in minor positions of power. Nathan raised an eyebrow, setting his coffee down. "Violation? For what?" Karen's lips curled into a smug smile as she tapped her clipboard. "That lawn chair. It's unapproved outdoor furniture." Nathan blinked. Then, slowly, he glanced down at the offending piece of furniture. A simple, foldable chair he had dragged out to enjoy the morning sun. He let out a short laugh. "You're joking." Karen's expression didn't budge. "We have regulations. All outdoor furniture must conform to HOA-approved aesthetics. This," she gestured at the chair like it was a pile of trash, "does not. You'll receive a formal notice and fine in the mail." Nathan exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. "Let me get this straight. I'm being fined over a lawn chair." Karen clasped her hands together, feigning sympathy. "It's about maintaining neighborhood integrity. We all agreed to the rules when we bought our homes." Nathan didn't recall agreeing to a dictatorship. "I'm not paying a dime for this nonsense," he said firmly. Karen's eyes narrowed, her smug facade cracking just slightly. "Then you'll be in noncompliance. And noncompliance has consequences." With that, she pivoted on her heel and strutted off, leaving Nathan staring after her in disbelief. What had he gotten himself into? The first fine arrived in the mail 3 days later, $150 for an unauthorized outdoor furnishing. Nathan Carter scoffed, tossing the letter onto his kitchen counter. "Figures," he muttered. But that was just the beginning. By the end of the week, another letter appeared. This time, it cited a non-compliant driveway aesthetic. Apparently, his truck, a vintage 1978 Ford F-150 that he had spent years restoring, was an eyesore. That fine, $500. Nathan wasn't the type to get rattled easily, but something about the absurdity of it all gnawed at him. The letters, the nitpicking, the way Karen always seemed to be lurking, waiting for him to step out of line. Then came the legal threats. One afternoon, as he was returning from the grocery store, a manila envelope was taped to his front door. A formal warning of noncompliance from the HOA's legal department, claiming that repeated violations could lead to lien placement on his home. Nathan let out a slow breath, gripping the envelope tightly. They were serious. But so was he. He marched straight to his desk, pulled out his laptop, and started researching HOA bylaws. If Karen wanted a war, he'd make sure he wasn't walking in blind. An hour later, he had found a few interesting tidbits. The HOA couldn't actually fine homeowners without due process. His truck was legally parked in his driveway and was classified as a vintage vehicle, meaning it wasn't subject to HOA regulations regarding unsightly vehicles. The lawn chair rule wasn't even in the bylaws. Karen had made it up. Armed with facts, Nathan walked outside the next morning, intent on confronting her. And sure enough, there she was. Karen stood near the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, speaking to another board member, a meek-looking man who kept nodding nervously as she rattled off violations. Nathan approached, crossing his arms. "We need to talk." Karen barely glanced up. "Mr. Carter, if this is about your fines, I suggest you take it up with the board at our next meeting." Nathan didn't flinch. "Oh, I will." But first, explain something to me. Where exactly in the bylaws does it say I can't have a lawn chair? That made her pause. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. It's an HOA standard. No, it's not. Nathan pulled out a printed copy of the bylaws, flipping through it. Nowhere in here does it say outdoor seating is restricted. And that fine about my truck? Invalid. It's legally classified as a vintage vehicle. Try again. Karen's jaw clenched, but she wasn't about to back down in public. Well, Mr. Carter, you should know that continued defiance of HOA guidelines will result in escalated actions. Nathan narrowed his eyes. Is that a threat? It's a warning. She turned sharply and strode off, but Nathan didn't miss the way her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped her clipboard. That night, the retaliation escalated. The next morning, Nathan woke up to a loud banging on his front door. He pulled it open to find a uniformed city inspector standing there, a clipboard in hand. Morning, sir. We've received multiple complaints from the HOA about your property. I'll need to conduct an inspection. Nathan's blood ran hot. So that's Karen's next move. Weaponizing city inspectors? He stepped aside, jaw tightening as the inspector walked in. Fine. Let's play. The HOA escalates the conflict. Nathan stood in his living room, arms crossed, as the city inspector methodically examined every corner of his property. The man, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes, seemed annoyed to even be there. After about 15 minutes of looking around, the inspector closed his clipboard. Everything looks fine to me, he said, sighing. Honestly, I don't know why the HOA keeps calling us out here. This is the third complaint this month. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Third? What were the other two for? The inspector flipped through his notes. One was about improper flagpole height. That was dismissed immediately. And the other was a claim that your front lawn was hazardous due to uneven terrain. Nathan let out a dry laugh. You're telling me Karen called you over because my grass wasn't flat enough? The inspector shrugged. Wouldn't be the weirdest call we've gotten from this HOA. Look, Mr. Carter, I'll file this report and close the case. But just a heads up, if they keep pushing, they might escalate things. Nathan saw it for what it was. A warning. Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The setup. And he was right. 2 days later, he found another violation notice in his mailbox. This time, it was a final warning. Unapproved exterior modifications. His fence had been repaired without authorization. Unauthorized vehicle storage. His truck was now considered an abandoned project, even though he drove it weekly. Failure to comply with multiple HOA directives. A vague but ominous accusation. The kicker? The letter stated that if he didn't comply within 7 days, the HOA had the authority to begin the process of placing a lien on his home. Nathan sat down at his kitchen table, gripping the paper tightly. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. Investigating the HOA. Karen was going all in, so Nathan decided to do the same. He started digging. He went through every email, every notice, every fine he'd received. He even reached out to a few neighbors who had quietly complained about the HOA, but never fought back. What he found was worse than he expected. Selective enforcement. Karen only issued citations to homeowners who challenged her authority. Others got away with blatant violations. Mysterious donations. A few residents admitted they had paid Karen off to make their fines disappear. Overcharging fines. The bylaws stated that HOA fines couldn't exceed $100 per violation. Yet Karen had been issuing them for $500, even $1,000. Nathan wasn't just dealing with a power-hungry HOA president. He was dealing with a full-blown scam, turning the board against Karen. The next HOA meeting was coming up in 3 days. And Nathan wasn't going to wait for it. He was going to make his move now. That evening, he knocked on the door of one of the HOA board members, a middle-aged woman named Linda. She looked hesitant when she opened the door. Nathan, I can't. You don't have to say anything, he interrupted, handing her a folder filled with his findings. Just read this. Linda frowned, flipping through the pages. As she read, her expression slowly shifted, from confusion to shock, then to anger. She's pocketing the fines, she whispered. Nathan nodded. And that's just the start. Linda exhaled sharply. This isn't right. But the rest of the board. Some of them are in on it, Nathan finished. But I don't think all of you are. And I don't think you want your names tied to this when it blows up. Linda was silent for a moment. Then finally she nodded. I'll see what I can do. The first crack in Karen's control. The next morning, Nathan noticed something unusual. Karen usually took her morning inspection walk with her clipboard, scanning the neighborhood for new ways to terrorize homeowners. But today, she wasn't alone. Two HOA board members, Linda and a man named Tom, were walking with her, looking tense as she spoke. And for the first time, Karen looked rattled. Nathan smirked. The cracks were forming. But he wasn't done yet. He was going to bring the whole HOA down. The HOA oversteps and the protagonist strikes back. Karen wasn't about to go down without a fight. If anything, Nathan's resistance only made her double down. The next morning, he woke up to the sound of metal clanking outside. When he stepped onto his porch, his blood ran hot. His truck was gone. At first, he thought it had been stolen, until he saw the bright red sticker on his driveway. Towed by order of HOA. Nathan clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. That was the final straw. Karen goes too far. Nathan stormed to Karen's house, pounding on the door. She answered, wearing a smug smile, arms folded across her chest. "Ah, Mr. Carter. Did you misplace your vehicle?" "You had it towed," he demanded. "On what grounds?" Karen pulled out her clipboard, flipping through her notes. "Improper vehicle storage. You were warned." Nathan forced himself to take a deep breath. "That truck was legally parked in my driveway. You had no authority to remove it." "Oh, but I did." She smirked. "And if you keep resisting, maybe your utilities will start having issues. You wouldn't want that, would you?" Nathan felt his fists clench. She was threatening him. She wasn't just weaponizing the HOA. She was breaking the law, exposing the HOA's corruption. Nathan had already gathered enough evidence to prove that Karen was running a scam. Now he was going public. That afternoon, he posted everything online, the fake fines, the overcharging, the selective enforcement. He included screenshots, scanned documents, and testimonials from neighbors. Within hours, the post exploded. People from all over the neighborhood, people who had been too scared to speak up, started commenting. Some shared their own horror stories, revealing just how deep Karen's corruption ran. The real kicker? A local news station picked up the story. By nightfall, the HOA board was in full-blown panic mode. The turning point, the emergency meeting. The HOA called an emergency meeting the next day, hoping to do damage control. Nathan showed up, but he wasn't alone. The room was packed with homeowners, angry and fed up. Even a news reporter had shown up, taking notes. Karen sat at the head of the table, looking flustered, but still trying to maintain control. "The information being spread online is misleading," she began, forcing a smile. "This HOA exists to protect our community, and—" "Then explain this," Nathan cut in, standing up and holding up a stack of printed documents. Unauthorized fines. Selective enforcement. HOA money that somehow disappeared into thin air. Karen's face paled, but she quickly regained her composure. "Those accusations are baseless." "No, they're not," Linda, the board member Nathan had spoken to, interrupted. She stood up, holding her own stack of papers. "These are financial records," Linda continued. "And they show that over the last 2 years, thousands of dollars in fines have gone somewhere. But not to HOA maintenance like it's supposed to." The room erupted in whispers. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She was trapped. Nathan took a step closer. "You threatened me, you illegally towed my truck, and you think you can get away with this?" He smirked. "Think again." Karen's face turned beet red. "You have no proof of any threats," she snapped. Nathan pulled out his phone. "And press play. If you keep resisting, maybe your utilities will start having issues. You wouldn't want that, would you?" Karen's voice echoed through the room. The entire board fell into stunned silence. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. Karen's control starts to crumble. A board member stood up. "I motion for an immediate vote to remove Karen Whitmore as HOA president." "I second that," another board member said immediately. Karen shot to her feet. "You can't do this," she shrieked. But she was drowning in a sea of angry neighbors. One by one, the board members raised their hands. The vote was unanimous. Karen Whitmore was officially removed from her position. But Nathan wasn't done yet. He had one more move left to play. Karen's final, desperate move. Karen might have lost her position, but she wasn't about to go down quietly. For someone who had ruled over the neighborhood like a tyrant, defeat was unacceptable. The day after her removal, Nathan noticed something odd. A car was parked across the street from his house, engine idling. Every time he glanced outside, it was still there. That night, he heard footsteps on his porch. His military instincts kicked in. He reached for his phone and checked his security camera feed. There she was, Karen Whitmore, creeping up his steps in the dead of night, clipboard in hand. Nathan immediately hit record. She crouched near his door, pulled something from her bag, and slipped a document under his welcome mat. Then she turned and glared directly into the camera. For a second, she hesitated. Then, her lips curled into a sickening smirk, and she flipped off the camera before storming away. Nathan exhaled sharply. She just made a huge mistake. Caught in the act. The next morning, he retrieved the document. It was a legal notice, completely fake. Karen had forged a cease and desist letter, warning him that he was now being sued for harassment, and that he had 24 hours to remove all defamatory statements about the HOA from public forums. Nathan let out a low chuckle. She was really grasping at straws now. He wasted no time. He forwarded the footage straight to his lawyer. That afternoon, he walked straight to the police station and filed a criminal complaint for harassment, trespassing, and fraud. By the evening, Karen was in handcuffs. Public humiliation. The scene was glorious. Nathan stood on his porch, sipping his coffee, as two uniformed officers led a furious, red-faced Karen toward a squad car. "I am the victim here," she screeched. "He's the problem. This is a conspiracy. You don't understand." The officers ignored her. From their porches, neighbors watched in stunned silence. Some even recorded the scene on their phones. Finally, just as they were shoving her into the back seat, Karen locked eyes with Nathan. Her expression was pure hatred. But beneath that there was fear. She had spent years terrorizing this neighborhood. Now, she was the one being dragged away. Nathan simply raised his coffee mug and smirked. Game over. HOA crumbles and Karen's downfall. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. For years, she had ruled the HOA with an iron fist, terrorizing homeowners into compliance. But now she was the one facing consequences. And the best part, Nathan wasn't done yet. The HOA faces its reckoning. With Karen out of the picture, the board scrambled to cover their tracks. The remaining members held an emergency meeting, one that was supposed to be private. But thanks to Linda, Nathan got an invite. The meeting was a disaster. Some board members desperately tried to distance themselves from Karen, claiming they had no idea she was engaging in fraud. Others argued about whether the HOA could survive after the PR nightmare that had just unfolded. Nathan didn't say much. He just sat back and watched them implode. Then, right as things reached a boiling point, a representative from the city walked in. The room fell silent. "Good evening," the man said, setting a thick folder on the table. "I'm here to inform you that, following recent investigations, your HOA has been found in violation of multiple state laws regarding fraudulent enforcement of fines and illegal property management practices." A murmur rippled through the board. The representative continued, flipping open the folder. "You have two options. Dissolve the HOA immediately and distribute all remaining funds back to homeowners, or face a full-scale legal audit." Checkmate. The board members paled. Some looked ready to pass out. One of them, a sweaty man in a cheap suit, turned to Linda. We can fight this, right?" Linda shook her head. "No, we can't." 30 minutes later, the vote was unanimous. The HOA was officially disbanded. Karen loses everything. Nathan stood on his porch the next morning, enjoying the peaceful silence. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. No one was lurking around with a clipboard. No one was writing up ridiculous violations. And then he saw it. A for sale sign being hammered into Karen's front yard. She was leaving. Nathan watched as Karen, now stripped of all power, stood on her porch, arms crossed, glaring at the sign as if she could will it away. A moving van sat in her driveway. She was boxed in, defeated, and had no choice but to pack up and go. Some neighbors peeked out from their homes, watching the scene unfold. A few even smirked. One older man walked by and muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." Nathan chuckled. Justice had been served. The HOA faces full legal consequences. Even though Karen was gone, the fallout was far from over. Nathan knew that shutting down the HOA wasn't enough. The board members who had enabled Karen's reign of terror needed to be held accountable. So he made sure that happened. The city takes action. A week after the HOA dissolved, Nathan received a letter from the city. The investigation into the HOA's finances had uncovered years of fraudulent activity. Thousands of dollars in illegal fines had been collected. Karen and two other board members had embezzled funds, using HOA money for personal expenses. Several homeowners had been forced into foreclosure due to fabricated violations. It was a massive scandal. The city announced that criminal charges were being filed. Karen was already in trouble for trespassing and fraud, but now she was facing serious legal consequences. And she wasn't alone. Two other board members, Tom and Greg, both longtime allies of Karen, were charged with embezzlement and fraudulent business practices. They could all be looking at jail time. Nathan's final power move. While the legal system was handling the criminal side of things, Nathan decided to take it one step further. He reached out to his neighbors, the ones who had suffered under Karen's rule, and helped them organize a class action lawsuit. Within days, more than 20 homeowners joined the case. Their goal? Recover the money Karen and the HOA had stolen from them. Ensure that none of the corrupt board members could ever hold similar positions again. Make an example out of them. And just like that, Karen's nightmare was only getting worse. She thought she could abuse her power forever. Now, she was about to lose everything. Karen's personal downfall. Karen had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood. Now, karma had finally caught up with her. With the HOA dissolved, criminal charges filed, and a lawsuit looming, she had no power, no allies, and no way to escape the consequences of her actions. But Nathan? He was enjoying every second of her downfall. Karen loses everything. It started with her house. Faced with massive legal fees and a lawsuit she had no chance of winning, Karen was forced to sell her home below market value. For years, she had nitpicked every little thing about other people's properties. Now, she was the one being forced out. Nathan happened to be outside when the moving truck pulled up. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, jaw clenched, watching as her belongings were loaded up. A few neighbors gathered nearby, watching the spectacle. One of them, an older woman who had once been fined for having the wrong shade of curtains, couldn't resist a parting shot. "Guess your moving truck isn't HOA approved, huh?" she called out, smirking. Karen's face turned beet red, but she had no comeback. For the first time in years, she had no power. The final humiliation. But the best part? Nathan later heard through a mutual acquaintance that Karen had been forced to take a job. Not just any job. An admin position at another HOA. The woman who had spent years lording her power over others was now nothing more than a paper pusher at someone else's HOA board. Nathan couldn't help but laugh. Poetic justice. Justice served. Karen had thought she was untouchable. She had thought she could bully her way through life, controlling others without consequence. But in the end, she lost everything. Her home, her reputation, her power. And Nathan, he got exactly what he wanted. Peace and freedom in his own neighborhood. Epilogue and final mic drop. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally felt like home again. No more ridiculous fines. No more bogus violations. No more clipboard patrols. Nathan could finally relax on his porch without being harassed over something as simple as a lawn chair. And he wasn't the only one enjoying the change. The neighborhood after Karen. A month after the HOA dissolved, Nathan noticed something incredible. People were smiling more. Neighbors who had once lived in fear of HOA enforcement were finally taking back control of their own properties. A family down the street built a backyard playset, something Karen had previously denied them. An elderly couple finally planted flowers in their front yard without worrying about a fine. Someone even put up a Halloween decoration display, a direct middle finger to Karen's past restrictions. It was their neighborhood again. And Nathan? He was just glad he had helped take it back. The final moment of justice. One morning, as he sipped coffee on his porch, a neighbor approached with a smirk. He handed Nathan a small, folded piece of paper. Nathan opened it and laughed. It was a fake HOA violation notice. Unapproved enjoyment of personal property. Fine, 1 coffee. Nathan looked up, shaking his head. Guess I better pay up. The neighbor grinned. We're just glad you stayed and fought. This place is better because of it. Nathan nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. Damn right it was.